Hey guys, it's Than, and today we're going to be doing some advanced blaster maintenance. Now, this isn't a mod per se, it's just how blasters work and how they're, how they're functioning and how to replace some parts. Now, what I'm doing today is I'm going to be replacing the gearbox of my Stampede, which is finally given out, and so I'm just going to be swapping out for another one. And I have a second Stampede that I'm going to take that from, I'm going to put it into the other one. And so we're going to just go through it. I'm going to go through the process of taking that gearbox out and installing it into the new one and testing it out. So let's get on to that. Alright guys, so we're going to be starting this up. I just opened up the Stampede. This is a stock Stampede. I don't believe it's been opened before, although I'm not sure. Actually, I'm pretty sure it hasn't been opened before. I got it from a Craigslist ad, but it seemed fresh. So it has all the locks in there. It can be very confusing. I would be lying if I said that I understood this when I first opened it up. It took me a while, and then I learned more. So we're going to be trying to get through all of this so we can get this yellow piece and also, well, the motor we're going to be leaving in. But it's all going to be in there. For anybody who's interested, most of the main body screws are this size. And I have this tray full of all these other screws that usually went to the front bit. I don't really concern myself with them much because basically I'm going to be sawing off the front part of that anyways, and I'll just keep these for spare random screws if I need to jerry-rig something together. Some of these screws could probably fit into Mavericks. I'm not sure. Anyways, but I took care of all those. Now, first thing that I do whenever I'm working on a Stampede is I hate working on it like this. There's a wire that goes to the switch that turns the blaster on and off. And that's connected to this side of the shell, and I hate having this shell dangling around because sometimes it falls and takes the whole thing with it. So what you want to do is you want to remove these two screws right here and here, and you want to keep those because you want to put that back afterwards, and also they're a size screw that can go into parts of the gearbox and other things, so it's good to just keep track of them. So we're just going to be removing that one first so we can get the switch out of the way, and that way we can just take on this side of the shell. Because I have a decent sized workbench, and this completely, just the one side takes up pretty much the whole thing. This is still hanging off my desk. So make sure you put these in a place you're not going to lose them. I have this little tray right here that I'm going to be placing right here for some of the internal screws. And once we get this free, it'll be a lot easier. Now what we're getting at, like I said before, is we're getting at the gearbox. Now the gearbox is what takes this motor, there's a bunch of gears, and then it runs along this line of teeth, and that's connected to the plunger tube. And that moves the plunger tube back and forth and allows the spring to have compression. Alright, so now, oh yes, also another thing. You'll notice along these wires there's just these melted bits of plastic. Now, let me see if I can get the camera. Hope I don't regret this because I may not be able to get the camera back to where it was. But if you look, here, there's that bit of plastic. Come on, focus. There's a bit of plastic that's melted, and if you look here, there's two little plasticky tabs just sticking right up. And what they'll do is that they'll melt those together so that way the wire stays in place. Now we're gonna have to cut those, so this wire is gonna be dangling. And again, I just do this so I can get rid of that part of the shell because I'm not gonna be working with it. So let's see if I can get this back to where it was. There we go. Put this right back down on there. Okay. So what I'm probably going to be doing is I can get some wire cutters. Those are good for that. And just make sure you don't actually snip the wires, because that would create a lot more work for us. But we're just going to be cutting right on here. Let's see if this wire is actually almost fused to that, melted to that plastic as well. So you want to make sure you just tease it off, just push it out. And sometimes you don't need to fully cut it away. Just cut a little canal in it, and that way that can just fish them out. There we go. 1, 2. And 3. There we go. So now that is free. This I can just toss off to the side there, and I don't have to worry about that until I want to put this thing back together. Okay, so we got that taken care of. I'm going to put on a headlight for this because it's good to have light from the top and light from exactly where you're looking for. So First thing, we need to get this whole yellow bit here. It's all along here underneath the motor, and then it stems back to this yellow circle. That's what we want to take out. So there's a couple things we want to take out. Let's get rid of some of this stuff too. These are some of the locks that make sure there's a clip in there. So there's 2 silver screws. We're going to be taking those out. If you want to put it back together stock, you want to save these. But if I was even modding this, I would take that lock out anyways. So I just put that again with my spare screws. I have a couple trays over here, and I just kind of toss it right into there. Maybe useful on another project, but this doesn't really matter. Let's see. We don't actually need to take out the trigger for this. One thing we have to take away is this plate here that covers up the plunger tube. And that's 5 screws. Now, when getting into the internals of this blaster, there's a couple there's 2 sizes of screws for the actual internals. Most of the locks have these screws with the washers on them, basically. But the 2 types of screws you're going to see in this blaster are going to be one bigger, one smaller. Or I should say one shorter. It looks like they're the same about. So there's the smaller one, there's the bigger one. And the bigger one goes in most of the slots that you're going to be screwing in. All the ones in this plunger tube here all take these larger screws. The 2 screws here and here on this orange bit that hold in the motor are the longer screws. The only thing that's the shorter screws, I believe, are I think this one right here is a little bit shorter. And a lot of the screws on the back side of the gearbox, which we will get to, and I'll point them out as I come. So I'll put them here because I know they're more or less the same size. I'm gonna be pulling 2 more. Actually, no, I'm gonna finish taking off this this cover here for the plunger tube. There we go. There's a little bit of grease on here or something, which is kind of yucky, but whatever. And it looks like actually the screw that goes right here on the 5 screws that hold this plate in, this one is a shorter one, and that's very important because this goes into the gearbox. It's possible if you did a longer screw, it'd stick in and then it would mess up the gearbox. It would stick right in there, so you definitely do not want to do that. Be very careful that this is a shorter screw, not a longer screw from the internals. But the rest of the ones on the plate here are going to be the longer screws. I'm going to take that apart and then zoop, lift up this plate. Now, just a brief description of this. I mean, this is the plunger tube, and we got a direct plunger system in here. We got the plunger here, plunger rod, and a spring behind there. Now, the interesting thing about this is that most plunger systems work on like a night finder. Like, imagine this is a night finder. You have something that you pull on here. You pull that back until it primes. What this actually does is kind of the opposite of that. It actually, the drivetrain moves these teeth forward, and this plunger rod stays where it is. And then you move it all the way forward, and when you do, this orange bit here contacts the catch and then releases it. So if you look at where the dart is going to be, the dart is going to be fully chambered, and once it gets fully chambered, it releases the plunger tube and it shoots forward, and then the return spring brings everything back. So that's basically how it works. I hope I described it well. But that's how the internals work on this. Just a little tutorial on that, and what we're really getting at is the gearbox. So let's continue with that. And let's get my screwdriver. We got 2 miniature screws here. These are neither one of the screws we've seen before, so make sure those go in a separate place so you know which ones go in there. They're a little bit skinnier, so it's probably a good idea that you keep to the same exact screws as you saw before. They are shorter. They're about the same length as the smaller screws that we've been looking at, but like I said, they're skinnier. And I do not know where that screw went. I think it maybe have gone into the internals, which is convenient enough because we're actually going there. So that's going to be fine. Here's the switch, main activation switch. So we can take that off and start getting rid of some of these pieces here. It is interesting to know that you don't have to remove all the wiring. You have to just move it out of the way, but you don't have to remove it to get this plunger tube out. Let's get this motor out. Again, these are 2 of the longer screws on the orange bit here. 2 of the longer screws on either side that just sort of clamp it down and sticks the motor right into the gearbox so it can work its gear magic. And we'll pop that out, and as you can see, most of the stuff just kind of falls right off. We've got the motor here. This is where the motor rests. You can see the gearbox or one of the gears into there. Now, I'm going to be removing this lock as well because there's some wiring in here. Just removing that board, that small board, and just, again, moving it out of the way like I am with this, just kind of moving it out. It's interesting to note that these are the smaller screws. Keep that in mind. Good to use for replacements if you lose some, because, again, I'm not going to be putting this all back together. I'm mainly scrapping this Stampede for parts. And let's get this out of the way. We see right in here, you see one of those tabs, and this is actually connected to the gearbox, which we want to get at. So we need to cut that so that we can get those wires out of there. So again, get my wire cutters, which I put over here. And I'm just going to be coming in and just, again, making sure we don't cut the wires, but just snipping off that plastic. Okay. So now it looks like we're going to be able to unscrew this and tease it out. There's a couple places where it's easy to access the screws, and we're going to do those first. But then after that, we got a couple screws that are kind of stuck in between a bunch of wires, and so you got to work around those wires, but they're fully accessible to grab. They just may not be easy enough. This is also interesting to point out that it's a really good idea to have a magnetic screwdriver. Super handy to have. And this got stuck in a bit of plastic, actually. We've got to unscrew it out of this plastic. There we go. And one more that's easy to get at. I believe there are 6 screws that hold the gearbox in place. And again, sorry if this is a long video, but this is the style of video I kind of wanted to do. It's just this is me actually doing it. So that way I can go over all the little details that some people might miss when they just say, all right, take the gearbox out. All right, now the gearbox is out. You know, I like to dive into some of the more meticulous details that some people may not understand, so. And okay, so we got this one here, this screw here, which again I had to move some wires for, and it's I have to kind of come at it at an angle because of this little mechanism here. And here's another one. I have to move these wires out of the way so I can access that screw. Alright. It's also handy to have a stronger magnet. This is a magnetic screwdriver, but not all magnetic screwdrivers are created equal. Some of them are better than others. I actually am going to be using just now this is actually a magnet from a name tag from where I used to work. And it's really handy to have because it's very powerful. In fact, it's moving it now, but it's not sticking. Come on. There we go. Super handy to have those around. And then here's another one where there's a lot of wires in the way, and I just kind of push them out of the way and screw right in. Here we go. Alright, so I have all the screws out. Now I want to tease this out, this whole block out. Make sure you don't yank it out because these are close to these contacts here. You don't want to bend those too much, and you also don't want to shove out all the internals, but just kind of tease it out. Come on. Here we go. And there it is. This is the gearbox, and this is what we're going to be swapping in for the other one. And now we have all of this. We can just put this back into here and put to the side, and we're going to be focusing on this in the next segment. Alright, so now we got the 2 gearboxes here. I put the X on the one that's bad because they look so similar. I would hate to mix them up. And so we're going to be cracking these guys open. Now, with this new one that I'm swapping out, I'm going to be doing a reinforcement of one of the spots in the gearbox. And I'll show you that. And I learned about this weakness after this one was really acting up, and I realized that it was broken. I actually yesterday tried to fix it with epoxy. It did not work, which I wasn't expecting that it would. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be swapping out for this fresh one and also doing that reinforcement. Now, I got all this information from the HVZ forums, specifically a big, huge shout out, I guess you could call it, for this guy on the forums, Taruk Makto, and I'm probably butchering that, so bear with me, but Taruk Makto on the forums, super helpful, and he actually made a post about this, specifically how to reinforce it, and I tried to fix the one I had, and it did not work. It also doesn't help that the Stampede that I'm running is running off of 4 truss fires and an SG Nerf spring, the 9 kilogram spring, and so, but still, it's just something that it's a weakness that's inherent in there, and it just broke. So what I'm going to do is I have both of them here, so I can open both of them up, and I can show you what is breaking, and it's easier to show it when you have one that's broken and you have the one that isn't. And usually when this breaks, before it happens, it sometimes misfeeds and jams a lot, and it runs away from time to time. And so that started to happen, and then it just got worse and worse to a point where it wouldn't stop, and then it just completely wouldn't even move at all. The actual breech itself on the whole system just would not move, and it made it sound like a drill, which is something you don't want your Stampede to sound like. And I'll show you why that is. So I'm going to pop this guy open too, now that the 4 screws are out. If I didn't mention this before, the screws that are on here are the same size as the smaller screws on the rest of the internals. Just to note that. But we're going to be prying this apart. It's kind of difficult. Okay, so we got these 2 here. Now what broke is right here. There's a ton of grease everywhere, but I'm going to have to just tough it out. It is this part of the gear here. When the gear is all set in, it is the 3rd gear that you see from the left. And see, that shouldn't happen. See, this is what the gear should look like. This is what it shouldn't look like. And I'll show you what has happened. First of all, let's separate these 2. There we go. And as you see on the top of here is a sort of a rectangle. I forgot what it was called. It's been one of those days. A rectangle on here, and this is what this fits into. It just fits right into there, and it connects these 2 so they both move together. Now, this is what usually fails, from what I've heard from Taruk, that this is what usually fails, is that this gets stripped down. And as you can see clearly, this comes on and off, and this can go, it catches a little bit, but it's more or less very rounded now, and I tried to epoxy them back together, it did not work. So it's completely rounded off. You can see comparison. This is just not usable anymore. So that didn't work. Away with those. That's broken. I'll still keep those just in case. But what we want to do is, when we first took this part out, it was sitting in like this. So you have the flat side, and then you have the webbed side here. So Taruk suggests that we epoxy these 2 together, but also that we flip this so that the flat, stronger side is facing down. So we would be doing it like so. So putting these 2 gears kind of together. And hold on, how do I get that back in? Anyways, I'll get that back in later because I can't seem to do it today. So what I'm going to be doing is, instead of just replacing this part, I'm going to be actually epoxying this together. Now, before you do that, to make sure you get a nice strong epoxy setting, you need to wash both of these pieces because there's grease everywhere, and now you can see my hands are all greasy. And he suggests a toothbrush and some dishwashing soap to get rid of all that grease. And then what you want to do is, he says, take a knife and gently, very gently, scrape a little bit off, almost like sanding, but you do not want to sand because you don't want to remove any more of this plastic than you absolutely positively have to, because that's the exact problem with this one, is the plastic just came off and then it made it rounded. So you want to just scrape off the shiny bit, scrape off the gloss coat, but try to remove as little material as possible. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll get back to you. So it's gonna be hard to get the camera off. I don't want to get it all greasy. Come on. Do it. Alright, so I just washed this off. And so now I'm going to be taking an X-Acto knife, and I'm not going to be trying to dig in too much. I'm not trying to sand it down. I don't want to remove the plastic, I just want to take off some of this shiny glossiness. Hold on, let me turn off my light, sometimes it looks better. Yeah, I want to take off some of the shiny glossiness. And I want to get rid of that, so that way the epoxy has something to grab onto. So I'm just going to take this and run it on a little bit. Just kind of scratch it up a little bit. And do that with all the edges. It's kind of hard to get the middle. Sometimes it's easy to kind of scrape on the side. So I'm going to try to take the point of my knife and just scratch that up a little bit. Here we go. I'm going to do that with all the sides. And then start the mixing of epoxy. There we go. Now the epoxy that I use, I hope it's going to be strong enough, just because it's not like a name brand. I don't know. It's a Mercury Adhesives, and I got this from my hobby shop. And so I'm assuming it's going to be good enough, but you can use pretty much any epoxy. I know on the forums they actually mention a specific type of epoxy or a specific type of glue. I don't remember what that was, but I'm sure this will work just fine. Okay, so now that I've kind of scraped that up a bit, I'm going to mix my epoxy together using an air restrictor peg, or dart peg. And I just do this on an index card so that way I don't get anything else sticky. And you can see I've actually used this a couple times for epoxy before, so. Actually, I'm probably gonna, I always like to do a little bit more just in case I've misplaced some or whatever. It's a good thing that cameras can't smell and that you can't smell this, because epoxy is just awful stuff. It really is. There we go. Ugh. Especially that hardener. Ugh. Vapid. Anyways, let's stir this puppy up and get these epoxy together so I can assemble this. You're gonna want, for people who aren't familiar with epoxy, you wanna, this is a 5-set epoxy, so within 5 minutes it should be decently hard. But you want to wait a full 24 hours before you use it. I've done that before where I haven't waited the full 24 hours for epoxy to cure and it breaks right off. And then I do the same job again, except I actually allow it to cure and then it's fine. So what I want to do is, because I'm putting this on the top and pushing down on it to get it secure on there, I want to put the epoxy near the top so that way it'll move from the top to the bottom. So just kind of coat a little bit on the top there. And then gravity, as well as the actual gear itself, is going to just squish all that downward and have the whole surface be all set to go. So, as I said before, we're going to take the flattened, harder side, and that is going to go down. So the web side is facing away from the other gear. Like that. Nice and slide. And I'm going to put a little bit of the epoxy right on this seam here, but making sure I don't get any in that hole, because that's where the that little rod goes in that it spins on. We don't want that at all. But just sort of almost paint it on with this. Nice and light, nothing too crazy here. If there's any more, I can just sort of get right on there. Okay. Now really quick, what I want to do is, I got this, there's actually a soldering tool, but I'm going to use this to just poke in the center, make sure there's no epoxy, and I'll be able to see it because it's going to sort of stick to it, but it's, yeah, I don't think there's anything going in that hole, so we're all set. So I'm going to set this aside for 24 hours, and then I'm going to reassemble everything back together, and that's going to be the next segment, is me assembling this Stampede back together to help you guys, because it's kind of complicated. And so we're going to jump right to that, so I'll meet you there. Alright guys, so I've assembled most of this back together to save on time. I know this video is long, and I thank you for your viewership and your patience. But I did most of it myself. It's basically the exact opposite of what we did earlier in the video. And so now we're just going to be putting on the last little bits, something to point out to make sure everything's aligned properly, make sure the motor's in there, make sure when you tease this in you don't bend these contacts, and make sure that the really tiny screws go right into here and here. We have the larger screw, the smaller screw of the internal screws. We have tiny ones that go in here, and also another thing to keep in mind is when this goes on here, the screw that actually screws into this yellow base, which is our gearbox, is a small screw. I'll say that again. The screw that screws into the base that locks it down right on the gearbox is a small screw. If it's a large screw, it's going to penetrate through, and then it's going to mess up our gears, and it's not going to be fun at all. So I'm going to put this together, and then we are going to do a quick firing demo once it's all back together.